My name is Tiffany, and I was 7 years old when my brother Tommy was born. He was born too soon, and I still remember pressing my nose against the cold glass and looking at him, so tiny, so defenseless, surrounded by tubes and wires, lying in a transparent box that reminded me more of an aquarium than a crib. I didn't realize at the time that this particular moment would be the beginning of long years filled with a sense of loneliness, abandonment, and painful longing for the days when I was the only child in the family, when Mom only looked at me when Dad came home from work and hugged me first instead of running past, barely changing clothes. He spoke to me with a few words on duty, rushing to the hospital to see his son. After Tommy was born, Mom quit her job and hardly left the room where he was lying, constantly sitting in a rocking chair next to the incubator, tiredly watching his measured, but so fragile breathing. Dad, without going home, rushed straight to the hospital, disappearing there until late at night. I remained in the background, thrown at myself, and although no one explained anything to me, I felt like every day my role in this family was becoming less significant, almost invisible. When Tommy finally got home, the situation did not change, but only worsened. His crying filled the entire space. He became the center of the universe, around which his parents' lives now revolved. Mom jumped nervously at every cry, rushed to him, forgetting about everything else, even about me. I quickly realized that if I wanted to eat, I would have to learn how to make my own sandwiches, because Mom was too busy to take care of me as well. I learned how to tie my shoelaces, comb my hair, choose my clothes, all the things that my mother used to help me with, but now she was not up to me. The turning point was my 8th birthday. Since early morning, I've been sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for one of my parents to remember that today is a special day, that Mom will bake a cake, and Dad will maybe give me a little toy or at least hug and congratulate me. But nothing happened. Mom fussed over Tommy, trying to feed him, and Dad, as usual, read the newspaper without once looking in my direction. It wasn't until late in the evening, when my teacher, Mrs. Roberts, called home to congratulate me, that my mother suddenly seemed to wake up, rushed into the kitchen, baked a hastily made, slightly burnt cake, and then shoved one of Tommy's old plush toys into my hands, not even bothering to remove his name from the tag. Over time, I began to run away to the house of Aunt Sarah, my father's younger sister, more and more often. Unlike my parents, she noticed me, she talked to me, she was interested in what was going on in my life, and her husband, Uncle Mark, and their daughter Emma, who was a couple of years younger than me, became closer to me than my own family. Sarah took Emma and me to the shops, bought us the same outfits, and most importantly, treated me the same as her daughter, without distinction, without reservations. One day, Mom saw me in a new dress that Sarah had bought, and her face contorted with a mixture of anger and shame. That same evening, I accidentally overheard her talking irritably on the phone. "You're spoiling her, Sarah. We can't afford to buy her new things." The truth was, they could afford a lot, but only for Tommy. He always had new toys, new things, new books, while my clothes were worn out to the holes before they bought me something new. But most of all, I remember one incident when I was 11. Then my teacher, Mrs. Anderson, took my mom aside after class and, lowering her voice, said, "Mrs. Thompson, I'm worried about Tiffany. She's been wearing the same clothes for 2 months now, and she's honestly in a sorry state." Mom blushed and, without even flinching, lied, "Oh, it's just her favorite outfit. She insists on wearing it every day." You know how children can be. When we got home, her embarrassment turned to anger. She grabbed my wrist so hard that there were red marks on my skin, and then, clenching her teeth, hissed, "How dare you embarrass us like that," and slapped me on the cheek. My breath caught in surprise, but I didn't cry, didn't make a sound, just put my hand to my face, which was burning from the blow, and looked at Tommy, who was sitting on the floor in the next room, happily tinkering with his brand new radio-controlled car. By the time Tommy turned 8, I had become more of a maid in the house than a daughter, because every morning started the same way. I started by waking up before anyone else, while my parents and Tommy were still asleep, pulling on old but clean clothes, walking barefoot across the cold floor to the kitchen and starting to cook breakfast, so that I could put food on plates, pack lunch for Tommy, put neatly folded sandwiches, an apple in his bag, a bottle of water, make sure that everything is lying flat, that nothing is forgotten, and then start cleaning, washing the cups and plates left by the parents the night before. The dishes were always waiting for me when I returned from school, as well as a long to-do list that my mother wrote, apparently, right after she woke up in the afternoon and thought of something else to load me with. While my classmates were visiting each other, while they were sitting in a cafe, laughing, discussing who they liked, painting their nails with bright varnishes and chatting about fashion, I was standing at the stove, chopping vegetables, stirring soup, folding laundry, polishing the kitchen sink, listening to Tommy complain that he didn't like the dinner, and I was picking up hurtful words that were on the tip of my tongue, but which I didn't dare say out loud. One evening, after several hours of cooking, washing, cleaning, and helping Tommy with his homework, I felt like I couldn't take it anymore. My fingers were numb, the skin on my palms was roughened from constant contact with soap, my back ached with fatigue, my head was spinning, and at some point I realized that I couldn't take it anymore. "Mom, I'm exhausted," I said, feeling my voice tremble with tension. "Maybe someone else can help with the housework." Dad, who was sitting at the table at that moment and listlessly flipping through his phone, didn't even bother to look at me. "You're already 13, Tiffany. You're old enough to help around the house. This is what responsible adults do. But Tommy doesn't have to do anything." I blushed, clenching my fists. "Tommy's just a kid," Mom replied coldly, without even turning around. "He needs time to be a child." I wanted to scream, I wanted to throw a pot at the wall, I wanted to run out of the house, slamming the door, but instead I just lowered my head, gritted my teeth and continued doing what I did every day, cleaning up after everyone, like a maid. I spent more and more time at Sarah's house, finding at least some kind of outlet there, because that was the only place I could afford to be just a teenager, not a free housekeeper. Emma, even though she was 5 years younger than me, became closer to me than my brother. I could talk about everything with her. We spent hours building complex structures from a construction kit, creating whole miniature worlds, which was impossible at home, because Tommy always destroyed everything I built. Gradually, I started staying with Sarah at night, and eventually my toothbrush, my pajamas, and several of my books appeared in their spare room. My parents never called to ask where I was, and it seemed to me that they didn't even notice my absence. Uncle Mark became the father I missed so much. One evening, when he found me at the kitchen table, poring over algebra problems, he stopped next to me, looking at me with an expression that read not only concern, but also sadness. "You know, Tiffany," he said, leaning his hands on the back of a chair, "your parents may not see this, but you have a bright future ahead of you. You need to focus on studying, getting good grades, winning scholarships, because—" He paused, as if unsure whether to continue, but then, sighing heavily, he added, "because I'm afraid your parents don't plan to help you with college." His words hurt me, but at the same time they lit a strange fire inside me. If my parents don't see value in me, if for them I'm just a person who washes dishes and cleans the house, then I need to build my own future. I immersed myself in my studies with renewed vigor, joined the school debate club and stayed after school 3 days a week for training, participated in academic competitions, Olympiads, essay contests, and science fairs. I won the regional debate championship, beating students from 15 other schools, and even got into the local newspaper. When I brought the article home, filled with pride, I spread the newspaper out in front of my parents at dinner. My mother glanced at it briefly, ran her eyes over the headline, and then casually put it aside. "That's sweet, honey. Oh, Tommy, tell Tiffany how you scored a goal in practice." I wanted to tear up this newspaper, burn it, throw it away. I wanted to scream that I had achieved this on my own, that it was important to me, but I said nothing. Their indifference didn't break me. On the contrary, it became fuel for me, made me work even harder. I started taking advanced training courses, took on any additional tasks, and sat at my textbooks late into the night, until my eyes turned red and my head hurt. My teachers noticed my work, even if my parents didn't notice it. They started recommending academic summer programs for me, offered college preparation courses, and when I turned 16, I got my first real job, at a small sunshine cafe, to save money for the future. Working as a waitress after school was the first real step towards independence for me, because for the first time in my life I had my own money, earned through hard work, worked for hours on my feet, with a tray in my hands, with a smile that I had to pull on even when I was exhausted to the limit. My first salary seemed to me a symbol of freedom, an opportunity to get out from under the constant control of my parents, to gain a little bit of independence. I remember looking at the numbers on the paper, already imagining in my mind what I could afford. Maybe I would finally buy clothes that would fit me, and not the rags that were passed on to me last after endless spending on Tommy, or maybe I could buy good notebooks, pens, and textbooks. The materials I really need for school, and most importantly, I won't have to ask anyone for endless sighs and remarks about how money doesn't grow on trees. But my moment of independence didn't last long. One evening, when I had just returned home after my shift, dreaming only of taking a shower and going to bed, my mother cornered me in the kitchen, her face tense, her lips pressed into a thin line, and my father stood behind her with his arms crossed over his chest. "When were you going to tell us?" Her voice was harsh, demanding. I blinked, not understanding what he was talking about. "About what?" "That you're working," Mom narrowed her eyes, her gaze literally boring into me. "You earn money by living under our roof, using our food, our utilities. We thought it was only fair that you start contributing to household expenses," my father added, as if it were something self-evident. "Half of your salary will be used for this." I stared at them, stunned. I was just thinking that I could finally manage my money, and in an instant, that opportunity was gone. I didn't argue. I knew it was pointless, that any objections would run into a wall of parental stubbornness. Despite this, I still managed to save up enough to buy my first normal phone in my life. Nothing fancy, but it was new, mine, bought with honestly earned money, and for me it meant more than just a gadget. I used to have an ancient flip phone that could hardly send messages, while Tommy always had the latest iPhone models, but I didn't complain. I chose this phone myself, it was my personal achievement. I used it to study, downloaded educational apps, took notes in class, and even joined several online study groups. It was almost a perfect week. And then Tommy saw me with the phone. "Hey, this is a good phone," he said, coming into my room without knocking, which, however, was customary for him. "Much better than the junk you had before. Give it here." I clutched the phone in my hand, immediately realizing where this conversation was going. "No way," I replied firmly. "I bought it with my own money." Tommy curled his lips into a familiar moody expression. "Come on, my phone is old, I need a new one." "No." He frowned, turned around and ran out of the room. I knew what would happen next. 10 minutes later, the parents appeared in the doorway. "Tiffany," my father said in his reasonable voice, which always foreshadowed an argument in which I had no chance. "Tommy says you're being selfish." "I bought this phone myself," I protested, barely able to contain myself. "I work after school, I give you half of my salary, and now I can't even keep what I bought." "You live in this house," Mom replied calmly. "We feed you, we give you a roof over your head, and you behave like an ungrateful egotist. Is that how good sisters behave?" They left, but a sense of injustice squeezed my throat. I clutched the phone to my chest as if it was the only valuable item I had left. 3 days later, I found him hacked to pieces on the floor of my room. The screen was smashed, the case cracked, as if someone had deliberately stepped on it. I rushed downstairs to the living room, where Tommy was carelessly lying on the couch, staring at his tablet. "Is that you?" My voice was shaking with rage. Tommy just shrugged, smiling lazily. Maybe you should take better care of your stuff. I've never felt so powerless. When the college acceptance letter arrived, it was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. All those nights without sleep, endless extra classes, participating in competitions, studying to the point of exhaustion, it all finally paid off. 3 colleges accepted me: the University of Riverside, the College of Wellington, and our local public university. I sat on the bed with the letters spread out in front of me, rereading each word over and over again, feeling my heart pounding with excitement. Riverside and Wellington were my dream colleges, but the tuition fees were huge. The state university wasn't that prestigious, but they offered me a full scholarship. I knew that this decision would change my whole life. The choice was obvious. I couldn't afford to pay for college on my own, and I knew better than to expect help from my parents. I no longer had any illusions that they would suddenly change, suddenly realize how hard every achievement was for me, suddenly realize that I deserve support. The only option I had was a state university, where I was offered a full scholarship, but, as always, even here fate threw me another obstacle. There was a small note in the letter from the university: since you live within the city limits, you are not eligible for student housing. Our dormitories are reserved only for students from other states and students coming from long distances. I reread these lines over and over again, and despair grew inside me each time. This meant that I would have to continue living at home, under the same roof with my parents, who never considered me important, with Tommy, who considered me nobody, and continue to play the role of a servant, despite all my efforts to escape from this cage. I decided to share the news over dinner that night, trying to keep at least a little bit of pride in my voice, because no matter what, I made it. Tommy was also at the table, munching pasta and playing on his phone at the same time. Of course, it was the latest model. I got accepted to college, I said, keeping my voice steady. Actually, there are 3 colleges, but I'm going to go to a public university. For a moment, I noticed both parents looking up. Even Mom smiled, and there was something almost approving in that expression. "Well, that's wonderful, Tiffany," my father said, and it seemed to me that there was even pride in his voice. "One day you will understand what hard work can achieve." I felt a warmth spreading in my chest, a strange, almost forgotten sensation. Maybe everything has finally changed. Maybe they finally saw me. But then Mom cleared her throat, put down her fork, and with the same apparent concern that always foreshadowed something unpleasant, she said, "Now that you're an adult student, we need to discuss your living conditions." I tensed up. "What?" "We decided that you have to pay the rent." I choked on the pasta, and Tommy had to pat me on the back, which, judging by his grin, brought him great pleasure. "What?" I blinked, hoping I'd misheard. "Almost $11,000 a year," my father added calmly, cutting off a piece of meat on his plate. I gasped, finally able to breathe again. "It's impossible. I can't afford it." Mom shrugged, taking a bite of her dinner, as if she didn't care what effect her words had on me. "We've been paying rent on this house every month, Tiffany, for years. You're an adult now. It's time for you to learn what responsibility is in the real world." I could feel the anger building inside me, but along with it, the despair grew. "But I will be a full-time student. Even if I work 2 jobs, I won't be able to earn that much money." Then the expression on the parents' face changed. I've seen it before, I've seen it hundreds of times, and it always meant the same thing: another injustice was brewing for me again, which I couldn't do anything about. "Well," my father said slowly, leaning forward, "if you can't contribute to the household expenses, maybe it's time for you to find your own place. It's time to get back on your feet." I clenched my teeth, fighting back tears. "What about Tommy?" My voice was shaking, but I couldn't help but ask. "Will he also have to pay rent when he turns 18? Dad tensed, and then, without a second thought, he snapped. "This is different." "Why?" "Your brother has special needs." I jumped to my feet in a rage. Special needs? He's perfectly healthy. He's fine. Tiffany, Mom said coldly, we're not going to discuss this. I knew it was useless to argue. They made a decision. In their eyes, I was never Tommy's equal. I spent the next 2 days packing my life into boxes and bags. It didn't take long. The years spent as a less-loved child meant that I didn't have many possessions. Every book, every piece of clothing, every little thing that I put in a box felt not only like a tangible thing, but also as a symbol of everything that I had never had, everything that I so longed for but never received: love, care, recognition. When I took my last box out of the house, when I stopped on the threshold, looking back at the walls that had been my prison for so many years, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Finally! Tommy exclaimed enthusiastically, coming out of the living room. I'm going to turn your room into a perfect playroom. Maybe I'll put a big TV where your bed was, and a gaming chair by the window. No, I need space for another console. I didn't answer. She didn't take a last look. She didn't say a word. I just stepped out the door and slammed it behind me. That night, I stood on Aunt Sarah's doorstep, pressing my lips together until it hurt, trying to hold back the tears while I rang the doorbell. I just had enough strength not to burst into tears right here, on the porch path flooded with light, surrounded by flower beds with flowers that Sarah cared so much about. Uncle Mark opened the door, and at the same moment, when his eyes slid over my face, over my red-rimmed eyes, over my slumped shoulders, over the bags stacked at my feet, his gaze darkened, his expression became hard, almost threatening. Sarah. He called out loudly, already knowing what had happened even before I could get a word out. My aunt appeared instantly, and when I opened my mouth to explain, my voice betrayed me, stopped at the very first word, and I just shook my head until tears began to flow down my cheeks. They did it, didn't they? Aunt Sarah's voice was trembling, but not from excitement, but from anger. I nodded, trying to find the words, but I forced myself to say, they kicked me out. Their own daughter. Why? Anger rang in Sarah's voice, and her hands clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms. Because I couldn't pay the rent, I tried to laugh, but the sound came out broken. They said I was 18, that I was an adult, that I had to. I don't care how old you are, Mark interrupted her, and his voice was so firm, so confident, that he seemed to cut this conversation in two. 18 or 80. You will stay with us. No arguments. And at that moment, when Sarah pulled me into her arms, for the first time in many years, I felt that I was where I should be, that this place, this house, these people were my real family. That night, lying in their guest room, my room now, I finally allowed myself to cry, but not only from pain or fear, but also from relief. I spent the summer working full-time at the Sunshine Cafe, saving every penny for college expenses. Sarah and Mark categorically refused to charge me anything for rent or food, insisting that I focus on my studies. When autumn came, I started classes at the State University. It was hard to combine studying and working in a cafe, but I was determined to succeed. I sat at my textbooks until late at night, earned money, tried my best, and every little achievement was a victory for me. But the most amazing thing was that Sarah and Mark treated me the same way they treated Emma. They helped me with my assignments, supported me when I had difficult exams, and celebrated my successes in a way my parents had never done. They even insisted that I join them on their family vacation at the beach. And it was strange to feel like part of a family where you were loved. Every time they included me in family photos, every time they introduced me to their friends as our Tiffany, every time they hung my diplomas and awards on the wall next to Emma's achievements, it all healed the part of my heart that had been broken for so long. My parents and Tommy have become strangers. Every time we accidentally crossed paths on the street, they looked right through me, as if I were invisible. It hurt at first, But then I realized that their absence from my life caused me much less pain than their presence. But Tommy couldn't just leave me alone. One day, in the middle of the semester, during my shift at Sunshine, he walked into a cafe with a group of friends. I could tell from his smug grin that it wasn't an accident. Well, he drawled as I approached their table, taking out a notebook. Look who it is, guys. My sister is a waitress. Still serving coffee after college, really living the dream. One of his friends giggled, and the others looked at each other, grinning merrily. I kept my expression neutral. Welcome to Sunshine Cafe. Tommy pretended to think about it, deliberately studying the menu for a long time, although I was sure he already knew what he was going to say. Oh, I dunno, he drawled thoughtfully. What would you recommend? You're an expert on cheap food, right? His friends laughed louder. Tommy spent the next 20 minutes turning my serving of their table into a small performance. I ordered coffee first and immediately sent it back, saying it was too hot, then too cold. He complained that there was too much mayonnaise in the sandwich, then said that there wasn't enough mayonnaise. I knew where he was going, and I knew that if I answered him, if I let myself get angry, it would only benefit him and his friends. But the last straw was his loud remark when I was clearing the table. Maybe if you studied something useful instead of just running away from home, you wouldn't be stuck in this dead-end job. I could have told him that I wasn't stuck. That I work here by choice, to pay for my education, to build a future. That I was already far ahead while he continued to play his stupid games. But I just continued to collect the dirty plates, restraining myself, remembering Aunt Sarah's words. Some people are so small inside that they can only feel big by making others feel insignificant. After graduating from college, I got an entry-level position at Anderson & Mills Consulting. The salary wasn't sky-high, but it was stable, gave me the opportunity to grow, and most importantly, it was the right foot in the door, the first real step in a career that I was building on my own. I threw myself into my work with the same determination that I once used to study at night in college, took on additional projects, stayed in the office longer than necessary, and greedily absorbed every bit of knowledge that could bring me closer to success. After my second paycheck, I finally found a small studio apartment on the other side of town, a tiny space, but mine, completely mine. When I told Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mark that I was moving, I saw tears in their eyes. Are you sure you don't want to stay longer? Aunt Sarah asked, helping me put my things in boxes. You know you're always welcome here. I hugged her tightly, burying my face in her shoulder, as I used to do when I was sick as a child. I know, but it's time for me to get back on my feet, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Besides, I will visit you so often that you will get tired of me. And I kept my promise. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday, unexpected visits on weekdays, just to drink tea and talk, I did everything to let them know that they are my family, my real family. Emma often stayed over at my place, especially when she needed a break from student life, and I helped her with her assignments, just like Uncle Mark used to help me. We watched movies, chatted about work, friends, and life, and every year I felt that our bond was getting stronger. As the years passed, I moved up the career ladder. Late nights in the office, weekend projects, additional certifications that I took on my own initiative, I did everything that was necessary, and in the end my efforts paid off. By the age of 28, I had been promoted to Senior Operations Director. Now I had my own team of 30 people, and I was earning more than I could ever have imagined. One Sunday at dinner at Aunt Sarah's and Uncle Mark's house, in the house that had become my home the moment my parents abandoned me, I smiled and said, I'm thinking about buying a house. Really? Uncle Mark asked in surprise, putting down his fork. Something with a nice yard, maybe even a pool. That would be great, I added, thinking out loud. Aunt Sarah suddenly remembered something and said, Oh, that reminds me. I ran into your mom at the grocery store last week. My back stiffened. Yes? I tried to tell her how well you're doing. I thought that maybe after all these years. She shook her head before I could ask, and there was a flash of pain in her eyes, a pain I no longer felt. She interrupted me before I could finish. Sarah said softly. She said that she doesn't have a daughter and she doesn't care what you do. The words hung in the air like poison, but I felt strangely calm. Uncle Mark reached out and squeezed my hand, but it didn't hurt. In fact, for the first time in many years, I clearly realized what I needed to do. The next day, I called my friend Jennifer, who worked as a realtor. Hey, Jen. I need a favor. Can you find out who owns the house at 1247 Maple Street? Jennifer didn't ask any questions. A few hours later, she called back and gave me the information. Mr. Peterson owns the house. He's owned it for over 20 years, all the time your family rented it. Why are you asking? I closed my eyes, allowing myself to smile. Just curious. Thank you, Jen. I dialed the number, feeling a slight tremor in my fingers. Mr. Peterson? My name is Tiffany Anderson. I am interested in buying your property on Maple Street. I'm willing to offer cash at 20% above market value. Quick closing of the deal. He was amazed, but money and efficiency proved to be a weighty argument. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the lawyer's office, signing the last documents. When I wrote my signature on the last page, I couldn't help but smile. The house where I had suffered so much pain was now mine. My parents and Tommy were still living there, unaware that their landlord had changed. The next day, I called Jennifer again. One more favor, I said, feeling the firmness in my voice that came with knowing I had complete control of the situation. Can you contact my parents as their real estate agent and inform them that the house has a new owner who wants to inspect the property and discuss the terms of their eviction? Just don't mention my name. On the other end of the line, Jennifer laughed softly. Oh, I'm going to enjoy it. When do you want this to happen? Let's make an appointment for next Tuesday. I imagined their faces when they would hear the news, and it was a sweet anticipation. When the day came, I spent the morning going through the real estate documents, making sure that every figure, every signature, every legal detail was in its place. Everything was perfect. I looked at the papers and felt satisfied with how far I had come from the girl who washed dishes and cooked food before her parents even noticed her existence. When I arrived at the house where I grew up, my heart was beating fast, but not from fear, not from excitement, but from delight. The house looked exactly the same as the day I left it 6 years ago, but now it was no longer a cage, no longer a place where I was humiliated, ignored, and used. Now it was just real estate that I owned. I went up the porch steps and knocked on the door. A few seconds later, it swung open and my mother appeared in front of me. Our eyes met, and I saw her face change from confusion to shock, and then to anger. Tiffany, what are you doing here? There was no joy in her voice, only annoyance. Dad appeared behind her, frowning, and then I heard Tommy's heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. Come out, his father barked, we're waiting for someone important. The new owner of the house will come to inspect the property. I smiled, reached into my briefcase and took out the documents, unfolded them and, holding them in front of me, said with icy calmness. He's already here. I bought a house 2 weeks ago. Would you like to take a look at the papers? The silence that followed was deafening. Tommy reached the bottom of the stairs, his mouth slowly hanging open. That's impossible, he muttered, looking from me to the papers. Dad opened his mouth as if he was going to say something, but stopped. Actually, it's more than possible, I replied calmly, walking past them into my house. When you're a senior operations director at one of the city's leading consulting firms, such things don't seem unattainable. I looked around. Everything was in its place, old furniture, the familiar smell of coffee and cheap air freshener, photos of Tommy on the wall, but there were no pictures of my childhood anywhere, as if I had never been here. The transformation on their faces was almost comical. Her mother's frown was replaced by a sickeningly sweet smile. "Tiffany, honey," she sang, as if she had suddenly kindled tender feelings for me. "Why don't you sit down? I'll make some tea, we can catch up like a real family." "Yes, family," Dad added quickly, trying to sound friendly. I couldn't help but laugh. "Family?" I asked, staring at them. "The same family that kicked me out when I couldn't pay their astronomical rent? The same family that told everyone they didn't have a daughter anymore?" "Tiffany," my mother began, but I interrupted her. "You were just trying to teach me responsibility, right?" She nodded with relief. "Well," I smiled, but without a trace of warmth. "I've learned that very well. Actually, let's discuss your new rent." I named the amount. It was twice the amount they were paying Peterson. The color drained from their faces. "It's impossible." Tommy exploded. "We can't afford it. Where should we get that kind of money?" I shrugged, repeating their words to me many years ago. "Not my problem." The father straightened up, his face became tense, his fists clenched. "Tiffany, be reasonable." "Sensible?" I raised my eyebrows. "You have until the 1st of next month to either pay the new rate or move out." They followed me to the door, their tone changing rapidly from pleading to threat, from appeasement to outrage. "Tiffany, please," Mom grabbed my hand, but I pulled away. "We are your family," she continued, and for the first time I heard something like despair in her voice. I stopped in the doorway, turned around, and looked her straight in the eye. "No," I said firmly. "You stopped being my family the day you chose comfort over your daughter's future." She opened her mouth, but I had already turned away. "You have 30 days to decide what you're going to do," I said over my shoulder and left without turning around. A month later, I was standing across the street, watching my parents and Tommy load the last of their belongings into the back of a truck. There was a strange feeling of unreality in this moment, as if I was watching a scene from a movie, but I couldn't feel anything for it except a distant, muted indifference. Over the past few weeks, they'd been trying to call me, first begging for more time, then threatening legal action, but I haven't answered a single call. I knew they weren't hoping for reconciliation, they weren't hoping for forgiveness, they just needed to avoid the consequences of their own decisions, and I wasn't going to let that happen. Mom noticed me first. She stood by the open car door, frozen for a moment, and then elbowed her father, forcing him to look in my direction. He raised his head, his fingers tightened on the cardboard box he was carrying, and there was no trace of paternal warmth in his gaze, full of indignation and resentment. There was no guilt or regret in their eyes, only hatred, a dull, boiling anger that now meant nothing. Tommy slammed the back door of the truck shut with unnecessary force, his jaw clenched and his hands clenched into fists, as if he was ready to rush in my direction with another accusation. But none of them said anything. They just got into their cars and drove away, leaving behind the house they had rented for more than 2 decades. I watched the red lights of their cars disappear into the evening air, and then exhaled and went to my property. My property. The words still sounded strange, but at the same time they gave a sense of something inevitable, as if everything had to come to this moment. I unlocked the front door and entered the house. He was empty, but still burdened with memories. I could feel them in every wall, in every corner, in every remaining piece of furniture. It was no longer the house I'd been kicked out of, it belonged to me now, but the shadows of the past still clung to it. And I knew what to do about it. Over the next 3 months, I completely transformed the house, repeatedly erasing from it every reminder of the pain and humiliation that it once held. The walls that saw my tears collapsed, creating a spacious, open living space filled with light. The kitchen, where I spent countless hours cooking for a family that never thanked me for it, was completely redone. Now there were modern appliances, marble countertops, stylish cabinets, and this place became one where I cooked only for myself and for the people I really loved. I stepped into my former room, which had been a kind of dungeon for many years, and smiled. She was gone. This was now my home office, with huge windows letting in the morning light and built-in bookshelves filled with the volumes I'd bought over the years. Tommy had once dreamed of turning it into a playroom, but now there was order, organization, and harmony, everything that had never been in this house. With each change, I felt the weight of the past evaporate. The contractors removed the old wallpaper, and with it the marks on the wall disappeared, where I once measured my height myself, because no one else wanted to do it for me. The creaking floorboard that always gave away my nighttime activities disappeared under the new parquet, and the stained carpet, which had been collecting spills for years that I had to clean up, was replaced with smooth, shiny tiles. When the house was fully completed, I invited Aunt Sarah, Uncle Mark, and Emma on a small grand tour. "This is amazing," Sarah breathed, looking around, her eyes wide open. "It doesn't even look like that house." I smiled and led them to the backyard, to where the old rusty swing used to stand, the same ones where I used to sit alone for hours, dreaming of a life full of love, care, and acceptance. Now there was a garden here, fresh and green, the flowers were slowly blooming, reaching for the sun, as if the earth itself felt a new energy permeating this place. "That's the point," I replied, settling down on the new terrace, my favorite addition to the house. We sat there, sipping lemonade, my real family, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft gold and pink tones, as the breeze gently stirred the leaves, as darkness slowly descended on this renovated, cleaned house, which was no longer a prison. Since the day my parents and Tommy left, I've never seen them again. Sometimes I heard snippets of news about them from neighbors, snatches of conversations passed on in whispers and careless phrases. They moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. Tommy finally moved out, but quickly realized that life without the endless support of his parents was not enough for him. But their lives were no longer my concern. My life was here, in this house that no longer held the ghosts of the past, in this life filled with Sunday dinners at Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mark's, movie nights with Emma, holiday celebrations, where there was no place for empty smiles and pretense, only sincere love and laughter. I thought I was looking for revenge. I thought I was looking for success, that I wanted to prove to them that I could, that I was better than they could have imagined. But in the end, I realized that wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for a simple truth: family is not blood, not obligations, not duty. Family is love. This is support. It's a choice to be by each other's side, no matter what,